different types of giants that are on the earth. And of course, as I mentioned to you several times here recently, looking at the prophecy that Jesus says in Matthew 24 is that it appears that we are going to have a repeat of these giants coming here in the last days. As Jesus clearly says when he talks about the wars, rumors of wars, the nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, that was only the beginning of sorrows. So what's coming next? He goes into a little bit further in the chapter. He talks about around verse 35 or so, that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. He talks about the eating, the drinking, the giving in marriage, as we've shared with you. Go back to Enoch, you find out what they were eating. It was human beings. They were drinking human blood, and the marriages were not necessarily consensual marriages either. And today we're going to really get deeper into this, and I want Steve Quayle, our brother here, to just have all the time he needs to share with you some incredible insights that he has. I know many of you know him. You've listened to him on different broadcasts all over the world. He's written many, many books, and I'm just really excited to have the opportunity to share with him today, or share him with you guys here today, here on Israeli News Live. So, Steve, God bless you. Thank you, my brother, for coming on here with us today. And we look forward to things that you have to say.
Well, thank you, Stephen. One of the first things we got to do is deal with a couple terms. The first term is Nephilim. A lot of people misuse that. They call demons Nephilim. They call giants Nephilim. Nephilim, as you know, is translated in Genesis 6 and also Numbers 13, 32 and 33 as giants. But the correct, as I understand it from people who are scholars like yourself, it means those who descend from the fallen ones. The root word Nepal or Nepal, I may be pronouncing it wrong. The Bible's very clear that after the second incursion of fallen angels, as a matter of fact, Genesis 6 says there were giants in those days and after those days. That means before the flood and after the flood. And as one of, I'd say, the most focused researchers in the world on the idea of giants and the whole, if you will, history of the world as it relates to giants, there's two different sizes we're going to deal with. The pre-flood giants were bigger than the post-flood giants. The largest post-flood giant we know of in the Old Testament is King Og of Bashan, the land of the giants. And what's important for people to understand, you just quoted Matthew 24 a minute ago. Matthew 24 is very clear that men's hearts are going to fail them for fear of looking after those things coming up, on the earth. We know in Matthew 24 it's coming up on the earth, and in the book of Revelation it's coming down on the earth. Woe unto you, inhabitants of the earth, for your enemy, or the devil, has great wrath, knowing but his time is short. And I think to put this into perspective, people have got to understand, we are not talking about large human beings, of which many of the circus freaks were, and they may have had a glandular disorder, but we're talking about historic reality and people and those giants whose bones are even with us today. And Stephen, you can put up the giant skull that we'll be displaying at Branson at the True Legends Conference this year in September. But I think it's critical that people understand, we're not talking about just something in a fantasy book, a fairy tale. The book of Enoch, Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Giants, Dead Sea Scrolls, all the different ancient writings deal about this. And so here's one of the things that I want to clear up right away. Nephilim, and this will help people with clarity, are the fallen angels, and those are the progenitor of the giants. The giants, from that point on, after the flood of Noah, are referred to as the Rephaim, the Rapha. They're even referred to, as you and I were talking before we went on the show today, that the dead, shall the dead rise to praise thee. So when you add all those up, I think I did, and guess what? They come out to be about 33 mentions in the Old Testament. So it's a big deal to deal with what we're talking about. Big deal, pun intended. Now I'm going to read, everybody, to set the stage for our interview, Isaiah 13, 1 through 3, in the Septuagint. The vision which Isaiah, son of Amos, saw against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the mountain plain. Exalt the voice to them. Beckon with the hand. Open the gates, ye rulers. Those are not normal rulers, okay? I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. Now, what did Jesus tell us? Jesus told us that the gates of hell would not prevail. So this is talking about a period where God is going to allow the judgment on a God-rejecting, population of the world to come forth. So again, now imagine this, and then we'll go wherever you want to go. Imagine that the extractable DNA of some of these mummified giants is intact enough to recreate, if you will, the Jurassic giants. I'm not talking about dinosaurs, but I'm just using that. Everyone is familiar with Jurassic Park. But the ability to basically take the, quote, stasis-like DNA and recreate a super being. And so the thing that is critical for people to understand is this is the book of Isaiah. Septuagint is, obviously the Greek version of the Old Testament, the first 5 books, the Tanakh. And I think the bottom line is that it's not fantasy. We're not dealing with something that's far out. And here's the question, too. Let's get this out, and then we'll go for it. This is an introduction. Jesus said in heaven they are neither given or taken in marriage, but are as the angels. We're not talking about heavenly angels. We're talking about fallen angels. A third of the angels fell. Isaiah 14, how art thou fallen? And the thing is that I believe it's critical, Stephen, that people get this, because everything now that we used to see in the future of supernaturalism is here on the planet now. Things are getting more bizarre, and the idea of transhumanism and transgenics, taking genes from different species and crossing the borders in the book of Genesis, everything that God created, he put borders for everything, and he created everything after its likeness and kind. And so what the devil tried to do, obviously, by polluting the seed of woman, is to prevent the redemption of the Redeemer through Jesus Christ. So at this point, I think this is critical. I think it's so critical that if you were to ask me, Steve, after all the years you've been at this, 45 years, whatever, what is the thing you would say to people? I'd say this: it's happening before your eyes. All the denial in the world isn't going to keep you from dealing with it. The transhumanist agenda is basically simply this: God did a crummy job making human beings, and we're going to do a better job. Now, that sounds just like the Prince of Darkness to me. And so when you're talking about the dead, I think in the Isaiah, shall the dead rise to praise thee? That word is the Rephaim, the valley of Rapha, the valley of the giants. And then you and I were talking, Stephen, about all the different Zanzumans and all the different things that end in I-M, maybe Zanzumin. But the point is that this is critical. We're in the days of Noah, and if Jesus said it's going to be that bad, and I really want to thank you for bringing this up, these guys weren't just eating and drinking, beer and barley. They were eating human beings and drinking their blood. And now, why is that relevant? Because all of the Pedogate revelations, all of the information coming out of Hollywood, their satanic ritual feasts and all this stuff, it's right back to that. So whom ye yield yourselves to, that's whose servant you become.
That's exactly right. And Steve, you brought up Isaiah's prophecy there, Isaiah 14. And I figured, because you've done so much research, most of these things you were already aware of. But it was something that I had just discovered myself in Isaiah's prophecy in chapter 14. But this is the famed biblical prophecy that we often see when it speaks about, Satan, thou son of the morning, how have you fallen? But what's really interesting, and for me it's easy to read it in Hebrew, but if I'm not looking over in the English Bible, if I don't have an English or transliteration beside me, I may not see it. I may forget that you're not seeing this as well. But verse 9, and looking at this in the English right here, the netherworld from beneath is moved for thee to meet you at your coming. Now this is talking about the son of the morning, and this is Satan coming down. Now they translate the shades are stirred up unto you, but it's literally, right here is Rephaim. Okay, so the Rephaim, they are stirred up, and even, watch this here, all the chief ones of the earth, or all literally the kings of the earth here, is what you're having that's written in here, which is the world leaders. Steve, tell me your thoughts on something here that really baffles me. And I'm not trying to pick on Catholic people by no means when I say this, but when the Pope of Rome says he's willing to baptize aliens, and he says, to make it clear, the little green men from Mars, and then he has this secret meeting with Quayle in Havana, Cuba, And still to this day, no one has ever, to my knowledge anyway, no one has ever known what the meeting was. It was never disclosed what the details were about. But Quayle does go to Antarctica right there afterwards. And, you know, some people might say, well, that was really no big deal, you know, and they talk about what was in some kind of conspiracy theory website that said that they moved the Ark of Gabriel down there. Well, you know, my wife speaks fluent Russian. She was just sitting there watching a whole series of a Russian movie there recently here. No problem, listens to everything. We were searching the Russian media when this all went down. Russian media never considered it a theory or a conspiracy. They did send the scientific ship down there. They did claim that the Ark of Gabriel goes down there. And it wasn't on Russia 1, but it was a credible Russian news source. And these things did happen. So Quayle goes there. John Kerry goes there. All these things happen here, but I can probably get way off here. But my point is that when we look here at Isaiah 14, Yeshayahu, we're looking at this. What's really interesting is that he's talking about the Rephaim coming up once again. And they were clearly, as Steve has pointed out to you here, they were clearly on the earth. We know this. This is what Joshua, what Moses even fought against these giants. The children of Esau did. The children of Lot were fighting against them. David as well, all the way down through the time there. So Steve, you know, if you can elaborate a little bit about this, because we're looking at world leaders that are involved in this.
Excuse me. Yes, and the deal that you have to have something of infinite interest to drag all these. The Pope was there, by the way. So was Barack Obama. So were so many people have gone down there, and it's my contention, Stephen, when I wrote the book, Empire Beneath the Ice: How the Nazis Won World War II, that a lot of the, if you will, the run-ins they had with non-human entities are what prompted them to move 1/3 of the Third Reich's technology and scientists down to what they termed New Schwabenland. Most people don't realize we went to war with the Germans in 1947. Admiral Byrd led the flotilla, and according to eyewitnesses, including Russian spy ships, even in that day, we got our heads handed to us on a platter with flying saucer technology. And remember, this is 1947, the same year that Roswell happened, and there's a whole lot of science behind the statement. Now, isn't it interesting? You brought up the Pope baptizing aliens. First of all, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, died for those creating the image and likeness of the living God, the seed of Adam and Eve. The Bible's very clear about that. Even the fallen angels, as you know, you refer to the book of Enoch, the Gregory, are in hell. They're singing to God for forgiveness. And God says to Enoch, don't pray for them. They should be praying for you. And the point that I'm trying to make in this is Antarctica will be brought forth. Now, when I wrote that book 2 years ago, I said, you watch the headlines fill with news on Mars. Because how they're going to spin this is the aliens created us, that basically they gave us God in their image, not being created in His, and that they're going to provide a celestial salvation based on technology and intervening in human affairs so that we don't, kill ourselves off. Now, first of all, the Pope is wrong. I'll say it again. The Pope is wrong. The Pope is wrong. The Pope is wrong based on the Bible. But this entity, the Pope, has done everything he can. Again, I'm going to go on record. I have Catholic friends. I'm not talking about believers, Catholic believers. I am specifically talking about those who have made the statement. Some of the smartest astrophysicists in the world believe this. Tom Horn has interviewed a couple of them. And the thing that is preposterous to me is the fact that something so anti-biblical could even be put forth as being a biblical precept, that aliens can be baptized. That's the same thing as saying that you move over the 12 disciples, Lucifer wants to become the 13th disciple. Oh, and by the way, that brings me to why Malachi Martin was murdered, the famous Catholic theologian. He was a very bright man. I think your wife speaks 5 languages. Yes. Malachi Martin spoke, 11 to 12, or maybe even as high as 16. But when he started writing his books, The Keys to This Blood, The Final Conclave, he started talking about the 13th chair that Lucifer literally sits in. Hence, there's a lot of superstition with the number 13. By the way, that's why he was murdered. He didn't just die, he was murdered.
Yes.
So when people start to die, you got to ask yourselves, what were their leading themes up until the point they died? And now we're Murder Inc. in this country, in every country of the world now. It's Murder Inc. And God is absolutely showing, in my opinion, the sins of America, the sins of its leaders, and now nations that once held us in respect hold us in contempt. I believe the prophet Jeremiah said that you become a hissing in the nostrils of the nations around you. So the reason they're all headed down to Antarctica is to see something. There is a power source coming out of Antarctica. I don't mean a conspiracy source. I'm talking about a measurable amount of energy changing the oceans, changing the waves, changing the weather. And again, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, he will have power to call down fire from heaven. Well, now we're seeing, just in the last week, maybe you've dealt with it, but we're seeing literally a particle beam or directed energy beam weapon being so concise that you can't argue with it. It's not lightning. It's not flashes of surface lightning. It's a directed energy weapon. So now we've got the issue that Satan himself is going to he demands one thing. He demands worship. And what's tragic to me is that the entire movie industry has been preparing people for this day, the advent, the revealing, the other words, the initiation, the Luciferic initiation. So,
Steve, real quick, not to really interrupt, because I don't like to do that, but I'd forget the thought sure enough. You say that Hollywood is bringing this out. Netflix just came out with this movie with, I forget that, Will Smith, I think is the guy's name. He's a
yes.
black actor, with all these different races of people. And I said, I'm sitting there seeing this preview, and I told my wife, I said, are they not trying to prepare you? I sat down and watched it. I wanted to see what it was about. And the one thing that caught my attention was when these, I don't know what they considered themselves, I forget the names of it, but they said, we've been warring against them, or we defeated them 2,000 years ago. Steve, they're definitely trying to get the minds of the people ready. And I think even with the children, they're trying to get the children to accept what's coming.
Oh, absolutely. And, here's the thing. If I could find any human being that doesn't find that it's not disgusting or won't speak up against it, I could probably find the whole Christian church, and I don't believe many synagogues are speaking up against the rabid cannibalism, the rabid child sacrifice, the drinking of blood. And listen, when they brought the temple of Baal, how do you pronounce it, Baal or Baal? Some people pronounce it Baal.
Steve, that's funny. Is so many people get so worried about how you pronounce it. It doesn't really matter. English pronounces it Baal, I believe. And that's yeah. Hebrew doesn't matter. Baal is how you would say it in Hebrew, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I hate getting stuck on the names. There's too many people. Yeah, I say Yeshua because I'm Hebrew, but Jesus there's nothing wrong with Jesus either. It doesn't matter which language. My wife used to say, Jesus or something like that from her country. He knows what they are. So yeah.
Well, yeah. The only reason I refresh everyone's memory with that is they are having Canaanitish religious ceremonies in the United States. Now think back a couple of years, Stephen. Before that, we had Anubis, the Egyptian god, being paraded from New York to Denver, Colorado. And before that, we had the crystal skulls of the Mayan priests. So what escapes most people is, thou shalt have no other gods before me, still stands in the Ten Commandments. Yet we have allowed foreign gods, and foreign gods are, let's say, charged with one thing: to take the people of God eyes off of the living God. And therefore, we're going to reap the whole destruction of Deuteronomy 28, in my opinion. We are